Oh,
Yeah,
Eric.
because I just shot him a message on Discord.
Hmm.
Crap. Oh, Gnome. Gnome, Gnome, Gnome.
Well, I'm in mint mate today. I have been trying to use Bodhi more, but every now and again there's a pain point. Eric says OMW. I think that means on my way.
I bet you're right. But at least we're streaming, everybody.
Okay, I am using the cat audio mic today, just straight USB.
It sounds great. Sounds perfect.
I hope I don't get the feedback on my headphones like I did with the other mic.
I can't tell when we're sitting here talking in the show. I've got a lot of filters turned on for you. Noise
Yeah, I still got a
suppression.
lawnmower over next door, but it's a long ways away, actually.
I can't hear any of it. I do have noise suppression turned on for you, so that's a little
Okay.
bit like using pulse effects or something, which I've had good luck with. And then, of course, with you, the whole learning process starts over a little bit again once we get onto pipe wire. Kinda, not really. They've done a good enough job.
And there he is.
How y'all doing?
Good morning.
What's happening?
Well, right.
Ooh.
Well, your weight loss is rubbing off, Eric.
I don't suggest this method of weight loss, by the way. I mean,
I
if
was
you're
just
hardcore
thinking.
enough, I guess.
Well,
That's
I
got to rate
finally
right up
dropped
there
below
with.
245. It's been a long time.
Good job. Good job.
All right.
Well, we got a show to do. You're still echoing, Bill.
It should stop now.
I think it just did.
Yeah. Just turned my headphones on. All right. Audio check, check, check.
Audacity?
It's up.
I gotta get mine up in a second.
This is episode 439.
Mono.
439.
All right,
And I
let me mute here
came
real
on
quick.
at 382, I think. 383? 283. Yeah.
I think I came on 377.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We ready? Eric's lips are moving.
He's got to install it.
Oh.
No, just testing. I always try to make sure I test it before I just assume that it's working.
Yeah, that's probably wise plan.
I've had it on the wrong mic somehow, even though it's on default. You know, it does all that fun stuff. So, all right, save as.
Oh, I got to turn that off. New sign in to Google account. Oh, I'm sure.
It was me.
Yeah, I just added my bill at mintCast to the machine here, but it's just now warning me. Gosh sakes.
I get that sometimes when the whatever it is finally like does a background refresh, depending on how you have it set up.
Yeah.
Okay, we ready?
Sí, listo.
Bill?
Yes.
3, 2, 1, record. That should be good enough. 0 time. 3, 2, 1, 0.
0.
0.
Did not sound synced to me, but okay.
You want to do it again?
I heard me and then Bill and then Eric.
You want to try it
Usually I
again?
I did
hear
it when you
me
said.
and then everyone. Okay, 3, 2, 1, 0.
0.
0.
Closer, but I guess that's what we got. Okay, we're ready to go?
Yeah.
And I'm doing it. Eric?
I don't care. I mean, you haven't been. I don't think you've hosted for a while, right? Probably.
Yeah, I don't
more
host
than I
very
have.
often anyhow, but
It's up to you.
okay.
I'm happy to do it.
I'll do it. What the hell?
Okay. Okay.
Get my dulcet tones ready here. Welcome to mintCast, the podcast by the Linux Mint community for all users of Linux. This is episode 439. This is episode 439.5, recorded on Sunday, June 9th, 2024. Back from Baltimore, I'm Moss.
No promises. I'm Bill.
And already tired of the heat, I'm Eric.
Please remember, if you want to follow along with our discussions, the full show notes for this episode are available on our website at https://mintcast.org/show-notes/. As always, show notes are linked in the show description. First up in the news, Mint Monthly News. Another U.S. state repeals a law that protected ISPs from municipal competition. Internet Archive hit with DDoS attacks. Proton Pass is released for macOS and Linux. And new features come to VLC. In security and privacy, Linux exploit found by U.S. federal agency. Then in our wanderings, Bill distro hops. Moss has returned from his musical excursion. And Eric deals with multiple security issues. In our innards section, Linux pain points. Why doesn't Linux just work? And finally, the feedback and a couple of suggestions. So the news, Eric?
So from Linux Mint Monthly News, this is from the Linux Mint blog. We have information on package repositories. The work continues on the repositories. They're now using Datadog to monitor the bandwidth, connections, and response time during high load. This allows them to understand the nature and length of the bottlenecks better. Also provides them with long-term volume stats, which are important when they look at pricing with Fastly and cloud solutions. The software manager, the Mint install software manager, receives some welcome changes. It loads faster than before, and the main window appears instantly. Unverified Flatpaks are disabled by default. A warning explains the security risks associated with them in the newly added Preferences window. When enabled, these Flatpaks are clearly marked as unverified. Note that unverified Flatpaks also do not feature any reviews and do not have a score. For Matrix, they've been using Matrix for more than a month now, and they're really happy with it. The integration in the upcoming Linux Mint 22 is fully ready. I suppose they're going to use that for support. There are more than 600 members in the Linux Mint space already, and more than 2,400 in the main channel. Other than providing support to users, the Matrix channel also allowed them to communicate with other projects and to form a team of artists who focus on the Linux Mint artwork. Related to GTK, Adwaita itself, and XApp, the concerns voiced last month about GTK, Adwaita, and libadwaita were heard. They were heard by many projects, including upstream apps, desktop environments, and distributions. They led to many discussions with a huge number of developers involved. Clem wants to stress the fact that some of these discussions involve GNOME developers and were very constructive. Although no big decisions or solutions emerged, there is a general consensus on the issues of cross-DE compatibility and independence from the GNOME project. There's also consensus on the idea of working together on common technologies. Any thoughts on these? There's some pretty interesting changes for Mint, which tends to not really change very much.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens.
Yeah, me too. I've made no. I've been vocal lately about my desire for the next release to come out, at least the betas, and I think we're going to move into at least for a little while. We're going to have some quite a bit to talk about as the new as Mint 22 moves to Pipewire, and then we slowly move to the age of we move into the age of Wayland and all that, which that's been a long time coming. I'm not necessarily as excited about Wayland as some people are, but I mean,
well, you got to do something because X is dead.
I mean,
yeah.
You say dead. I mean, it gets security fixes and major vulnerability.
It's on life support then.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, I guess one question we could probably dive in on a later date is just because a project is now in maintenance mode, does that necessarily mean it's dead? Or is that just the old attitude of if it ain't growing, it doesn't exist?
We're looking at you, NeoFetch.
Right.
I think for a lot of newer hardware, this is really where Wayland comes in with supporting the higher refresh rates, higher DPIs, the separate resolutions per screen. I mean, there's just a lot of modern, application of technology that X is just never going to get. And I think that's where it just keeps falling further and further behind. And even if there are security updates, functionally, there's just going to be a larger and larger gap. So this is a good thing. All right, Bill, what do you got?
Another U.S. state repeals law that protected ISPs from municipal competition. This is from Ars Technica. Minnesota this week eliminated 2 laws that made it harder for cities and towns to build their own broadband networks. The state-imposed restrictions were repealed in an omnibus commerce policy bill signed on Tuesday by Governor Tim Walz, a Democrat. Minnesota was previously one of about 20 states that imposed significant restrictions on municipal broadband. The number can differ depending on who's counting because of disagreements over what counts as a significant restriction. But the law has gotten smaller in recent years because states including Arkansas, Colorado, and Washington repealed laws that hindered municipal broadband. The Minnesota bill enacted this week struck down a requirement that municipal telecommunications networks be approved in an election with 65% of the vote. What?
How did they get this stuff passed, man? I mean, come on.
Oh,
The
man.
bill
You
of
feel like
or protection.
Wow.
the law the law is over a century old. The Institute, I imagine, did we have broadband a century ago? Okay. The law is over a century old. The Institute for Local Self-Reliance's Community Broadband Network Initiative wrote yesterday. Though intended to regulate telephone service, the way the law had been interpreted after the invention of the Internet was to lump broadband in with telephone service, thereby imposing that supermajority threshold to the building of broadband networks. The Broadband Advocacy Group said. The Minnesota Omnibus Bill also changed a law that let municipalities build broadband networks, but only if no private providers offer service or will offer service in the reliably foreseeable future, foreseeable future. Move. Uh, that restriction had been in effect since at least the year 2000. The caveat that prevented municipalities from competing against private providers was eliminated from the law when this week's omnibus bill was passed. As a result, the law now lets cities and towns improve, construct, extend, and maintain facilities for internet access and other communications purposes, even if private ISPs already offer service. The omnibus bill also added language intended to keep government operated and private networks on a level playing field. The new language says cities and towns may not discriminate in favor of municipalities' own communications and communications facilities by granting the I need to fix something here. I cannot. I gotta. My eyes cannot see it. There we go. The omnibus bill also added language intended to keep government operated and private networks on a level playing field. The new language says cities and towns may not discriminate in favor of the municipality's own communications facilities by granting the municipality more favorable or less burdensome terms and conditions than a non-municipal service provider. With respect to the use of public right-of-way, public-owned equipment, and permitting fees. Additional new language requires separation between the municipality's role as a regulator and the municipality's role as a competitive provider of services, and forbids the sharing of inside information between the local governments, regulatory and service provider divisions. With Minnesota having repealed its anti-municipal broadband laws, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance says that 16 states still restrict the building of municipal networks. The Minnesota change is a significant win for the people of Minnesota and highlights a positive trend. Trend states are dropping misguided barriers to deploying public broadband as examples of successful community-owned networks proliferate across the country, said Gigi Sohn, I apologize, executive director of the American Association for Public Broadband, or AAPB, which represents community-owned broadband networks and co-ops. There are about 650 public broadband networks in the U.S., Sohn said. While 16 states still restrict these networks in various ways, we're confident this number will continue to decrease as more communities demand the freedom to choose the network that best serves their residents, she said. State laws restricting municipal broadband have been passed for the benefit of private ISPs. Although cities and towns generally only build networks when private ISPs haven't fully met their community's needs, those attempts to build municipal networks often face opposition from private ISPs and, quote, dark money groups that don't reveal their donors. Now,
take that, Comcast.
Yeah. I mean, ISP, the whole thing with internet service in this country as a whole is abysmal, in my opinion. It really, really is.
Yeah,
we're on the idea. Sorry, go ahead, Moss.
We're on a new fiber ISP. We got off of Xfinity, but it is more expensive. We're paying $65 for 100 up and 100 down, and I'm not sure it's quite reached that, achieved that level of success yet. But it's better than Xfinity, and it doesn't go down as often.
Yeah, I think other countries look at us in this basically forced monopolized system where it's like anti-competitive at every possible turn. Not even the local municipality is allowed to compete. And that just, the laws themselves are so draconian and so, biased towards these businesses. They have huge subsidies and grants for building out their network infrastructure. I mean, the whole system is just so anti-competitive and really anti-capitalist. I mean, it's really such a strange setup for this country in particular. And when I've talked to people in like the UK, where basically their broadband system is that anyone can get the signal to your house, because in this country we have that last mile aspect where the broadband company laid the fiber, laid the cable, it's whatever the network infrastructure is, and so they own it and no one else can use it. Whereas in the UK, their telecom system is owned by the government, and so any company can use the network, so to speak. And so they have so many different options available. And like Moss, you said, $65 for 100 synchronous connection. Over there is probably like £5 a month.
Yeah,
it's like,
I know in Chisinau they have $25 a month for high speed internet for the whole country.
and you probably can't even get something as slow as 100.
Could be,
because everything is so much faster. So,
well, anyway. It's the American version of the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules.
No doubt. Well, hopefully this is a small little, step in the right direction. So.
I wonder, though, sometimes who's really at fault for what we've got going on right now, because, I talk to a lot of regular people in my life who do not really value internet service as much as people like we do, and that kind of represents, in my experience, that opinion represents kind of a broader scale of people, especially that live in rural areas. There's kind of an anti-culture against the internet, and
yeah, I can see that.
They got their phones, which a lot of people don't like having to have one of those, but they don't like social media. A lot of people I know don't participate in streaming services and things like that, and so I wonder if there's just not the demand to expend reasonable service out, or for there to be more competition for it, because we still kind of have this way of thinking that we had with the telephones, where if you want telephone, well, you got to find out who's the carrier in that area. We've just gotten used to that way of thinking. And that's kind of carried over in the internet. Well, internet, if you live in a city, you might have 2 or 3 options, which to a lot of Americans that might seem like a lot. But like you were saying, Eric, when you compare it to the way even third world countries, or kind of the middle of the road sort of countries, they've got way better service, way more reliable, and doesn't cost near as much.
Yeah.
Yeah. My example was Moldova, by the way. I only said Chisinau, which is the capital.
Gotcha.
Well, yeah, I mean,
All right, sorry.
Go to Bangladesh and you can get better better
if it wasn't washed out.
I mean, I can't speak to the quality of it, but yeah.
No, I mean, Bangladesh gets flooding a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, let's go on to the next article here. Internet Archive hit with DDoS attacks, from PC Magazine. The California-based nonprofit that archives books and web pages online experiences distributed denial of service attacks, making it difficult for users to access the site. That should be experienced. The Internet Archive is reportedly facing ongoing distributed denial of service attacks. The attacks began over the Memorial Day long weekend, according to the California-based nonprofit, and several users who said they were unable to access the digital archive site for several hours on Monday. Quote, archive.org is under a DDoS attack, end quote, the nonprofit's X account wrote Monday morning. The data is not affected, but most services are unavailable. A few hours later, the nonprofit added there was some, quote, back and forth with the attackers, end quote. The organization said it made some changes to its service, but has not yet shared further details on the identity of the attackers or any possible reason for the attack. PC Mag has reached out to Internet Archive for comment. The archives, wait a minute, I missed a sign. After Internet Archive shared that its services were back up and running Monday afternoon, multiple ex-users claimed the site still wasn't working for them. On Tuesday morning, the nonprofit confirmed that the DDoS attacks had resumed. The archive site also reported network traffic issues on Sunday. Internet Archive founder and board chair Brewster Kalla said that the issues on Sunday could have been due to an over-aggressive crawling group or a DDoS attack, adding that the site tends to face more technical issues on weekends. Boy, my tongue does not want to work today. Eyes aren't doing so well either. While other digital archive sites exist, many have domain extensions based outside the U.S. Internet Archive was founded in San Francisco, California in 1996. Kalla has advocated for, quote, universal access to all knowledge, end quote, via books, websites, and other types of media for decades. In addition to cyber attacks, the archival group has also faced a number of lawsuits in recent years. Major U.S. book publishers sued the nonprofit in 2020 over Internet Archive's digital book lending program, alleging copyright infringement. Last year, a judge ruled the program violated the publisher's copyrights. The nonprofit has continued to argue that, quote, controlled digital lending, end quote, constitutes fair use, however. I will say I completely agree with the Internet Archive, and it's going to attack libraries that have digital copies for rent or for use as well if this continues.
People
As
need
soon
to
as
leave
I saw
the alone.
Leave them alone. As soon as I saw the title, I thought, yeah, that's the publishing companies that are coordinating the attack.
It's interesting too because when I released, for those that don't know, we release shows. Okay, we try to release shows every early Wednesday morning, and this last Wednesday morning, I released the show, and Majid sends me a screenshot of his phone saying that there was server errors all over the place, and it went on for an hour, and I had nothing in my server logs or anything like that, and the only thing I could think of was that it was a archive problem because
Yeah. Well, what they do is they buy physical copies of a book, they digitize it, and they lend out one at a time as many copies as they have physical copies. They lend out the digital copy. And I do not see that as anything other than fair use. It's nothing more than a library does. And if they make it to where Internet Archive can't do that and libraries can't do that, then they won't have any hardcover sales because that's where 90% of the hardcovers go.
I was wondering if the libraries, the actual municipal libraries, have special permissions or whatever.
So for electronic, and this is something that I often am curious about, I'll look at our library and say, what's available, and you have to put something on hold even though it's an electronic resource, and I think, why this scarcity? Like, what's happening here? And it is they have to buy digital copies, and not only that, but they are apparently extremely expensive compared to what you and I can pay for just any random book. Like, we're talking, from last I remember, like hundreds of dollars per license for that book. And I think, because the justification for that pricing is that, well, multiple people will be reading it over, years and years, and so we have to recover the losses we would have otherwise. I mean, it's
How
really,
is that different from a library book?
I know. I don't disagree. I'm just saying that just this false scarcity that they have is really sort of odd, that I have to wait for someone to check in this, file essentially, so that then I can take it back out. It's a very odd system to me. I'm glad it exists. I worry about libraries. I think they're being attacked right now, unfortunately, by some very concerted efforts against knowledge and open access to knowledge. And I think that's a terrible trend, and I certainly hope that it.
Well, five states now have passed laws against that. And in fact, the latest one in Colorado says that if someone asks for a book to be banned, their name will be made public on the website.
Well, guess where I live?
Florida.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
guess,
it ain't
Moss.
gonna. Yeah, it's Florida or Texas. Poor Joe lives both places.
Oh my,
Yeah.
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 Which is why he's not here today. He's in Florida.
All
Okay,
right.
Eric.
So, Proton Pass brings secure and private password management to all devices. And this is from the Proton blog. Proton Pass Mac OS app and the Proton Pass Linux app were announced on June 6th. One of the most popular requests from the Proton community was a standalone desktop app, which is now available on every major platform: Windows, Mac OS, Linux, Android, iOS, and iPad OS. Oh, and Chrome OS. There's an extra and in there. Who did that? Via our Android app. As a companion to the Proton Pass Mac OS app, we're also pleased to announce the standalone native Safari browser extension. This extension offers enhanced convenience and security for everyone that uses Mac OS default browser. Unlike Safari's default password manager, Proton Pass allows you to sync your logins across multiple different browsers and devices, ensuring consistent access across all platforms. The Linux version of Proton Pass supports all Debian and Red Hat based distributions, including Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora, and CentOS. All Proton Pass apps and browser extensions are available to everyone, and you can use our apps in offline mode with a paid plan. More information can be found at the link in the show notes. Have you guys tried Proton Pass?
I really haven't. I'm just weaning myself off of Bitwarden right now. And I mostly just use Firefox.
Well, why are you weaning yourself off a Bitwarden?
Because I've got a a paid Proton account.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Um,
See, because that's the reason I'm not interested. I mean, I like it that it exists. More of this, please. But Bitwarden is just such a compelling project to me that I've just
well,
been so
I have found the Bitwarden wasn't that easy for me to use, so I might be interested in Proton Pass when I get done. Right now, everything's on Firefox, and if I have to use Chromium, I have to save a few passwords over there, and bleh.
Well, Chromium's got a add-on for Bitwarden as well.
That's true, but for Bitwarden, yeah. Well, anyhow,
So I've tried it, and honestly, in terms of being equivalent to Bitwarden, I think I could actually use it if I wanted to. I did like. So one of the things Bitwarden does, especially on Android, where I tend to use it quite a lot. I mean, the browser extension just works. I've never had any issues with it in Firefox or Chrome or whatever. Android, from time to time, it gets a little squirrely and it gets like it just doesn't want to work properly. And I can't get it to autofill. I have to actually go to the app, unlock it, search for the item. And not that it's the greatest inconvenience in the world, but it certainly isn't the seamless integration that, you hope is there. That is there a lot of the times and works perfectly, but then for some reason it just doesn't. Whereas Proton Pass, the time I've been using it, has a very, very slick integration. I like the UI, I like the way that it sort of overlays, and I think it's just a slightly better functionality than Bitwarden. But I still am not quite. I don't have a paid plan to Proton. I'm just using the free email. Like Moss said, if I had a paid plan, I probably would just go ahead and do it.
mm-hmm.
But I also, though, do have a certain amount of, I don't know. I have not necessarily allegiance or sort of, I feel like Bitwarden filled a gap for a long time for me after using LastPass and having an absolutely terrible experience when LogMeIn bought them.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to get off of LastPass, and Bitwarden was there just at the right time, and they added a lot of nice features. And the fact that they really only charge their users $10 a year versus Proton, which is certainly more expensive than that. If I used more of the Proton applications, I think I would be more inclined to use it as well. But yeah, for now, I'm probably going to stick with Bitwarden, but that is not because there is any lack of functionality in Proton Pass. I think it works really, really well, actually.
Well, Proton has been making various steps to make it more likely that people would want to buy their overall omnibus package. I know a very close friend has a Visioneer plan, and we buy into his Visioneer plan. You can have up to 20 people on your plan, I think. And so we pay him every year for using his Visioneer plan. But they added standard notes. That was a pay plan for a lot of standard notes users. And if it can just go into what you're already paying Proton, that's going to be a big plus. Anyhow,
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, no, I completely agree with you. They are one of those companies that really seem like they're trying to maximize the value of their, what you pay them, and they're really filling out. And I honestly think if they can do something with an online office suite, which I would assume they're kind of looking at or trying to figure out, like if they can do something with that, and I could get...
That's a big headache, but yeah.
Well, but it would be so nice to have something that worked.
You hear how we talk about Collabora?
Well, but just think if you could get something that worked as well as Google Docs or close to it, that would be pretty neat.
That's what's missing in this space is, in all of these spaces, including Nextcloud, which, as many would be aware, is a thing we need. You've got a couple options as far as document management, but what's needed is something that is a bit more simplified and user-friendly for people that don't necessarily have to create large professional documents, like the show. We need show notes. We need some ability to create bulleted documents and some, hyperlinks and stuff like that. We don't need a lot of the stuff that like Collabora offers. And so just in a way to get something up and running that's simple and easy to use, that's what's missing. And I'm really surprised there's not a bigger push for that, but these are huge projects that...
That's exactly it. I think it's a really big undertaking.
The other thing is that Linux users have proven, and in general, they don't want to pay for stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Okay, let's move along. VLC adds AMD VQ enhancer filter, improved Opus Ambisonic, and more from OMG Ubuntu. A new version of VLC, the perennially popular open source media player, is out with an assortment of improvements and new features. VLC 3.0.21 is the first maintenance release to be issued this year, following on from last autumn's 3.0.20 release. Maintenance and support for the VLC 3.0.x series continues alongside efforts on the next major milestone, VLC 4.0. A testament to its enduring versatility, even in the age of streaming, was recent news that VLC passed a major milestone, 5 billion downloads, announcing that Videoland, the team who makes the app, also shared exciting plans for the future of the app. But before the future comes the present. Many use VLC regularly to watch Blu-ray discs on their laptops. The VLC changelog says this update adds support for super resolution scaling on AMD GPUs. VLC already supports Intel's version and has added NVIDIA RTX super resolution support last year. Adding the AMD equivalent is welcome, though not a surprise. It was announced at CES 2024. Sticking with AMD and NVIDIA, VLC 3.0.21 adds a new AMD VQ enhancer video filter using AMF, looks to require a D3D11 compatible GPU. And relatedly, a D3D11 option to use NVIDIA True HDR to generate HDR from SDR sources. A lot of alphabet soup in this article. Elsewhere, VLC says Opus Ambisonic support is improved in this update, which might be the support third-order Ambisonic with Family 2 mapping merge, as is Opus MP4 and VAAPI hardware decoding with certain drivers, including the R600 Mesa. VLC 3.0.21 now supports HTTP content range handling RFC handling per RFC 9110 and resolves HLS adaptive streaming not working in audio-only mode. Beyond that, there are a lot of fixes, including a fair few for macOS, including better rendering of Asian language subtitles, and a bunch of general bug bombs and security patches. Library bumps CFFmpeg 4.4.4, DAC1D 1.4.2, and LibVPX 1.14.1 included. How to upgrade to VLC 3.0.21. VLC 3.0.21 is free open source software. Windows and Mac OS installers will be added to the VLC download page in the next few days and be available as an in-app update on those platforms. New versions of VLC aren't generally backported or added to the Ubuntu repos. Thus, if you want this update, if none of the fixes and features are things that you use, don't feel pressured to chase it down, you will need to get it elsewhere, but you've plenty of options. Ubuntu users can download source code of VLC 3.0.21 from the Videoland website, or wait for this update to be packaged up and rolled out via FlatHub, Unverified, and Canonical Snap Store Official, or fetch it from some other avenue.
Beep. 5 billion downloads.
Wow.
That's like McDonald's territory.
Billions
That's
and billions
wild.
served.
Yeah.
I mean, VLC's been around a hot minute, y'all. You know, that was the go-to player for if you had something with a weird codec set or something that wouldn't play anywhere else. I mean, that's how I first learned of its existence. And if VLC couldn't play it, by golly, it wouldn't play anywhere. So you knew you had a corrupted file. And I don't do it much anymore, but yeah, that was the player for playing your Blu-rays on your laptop. So, yeah, good news.
I just think the consistency is really what I appreciate. You just, like you said, like if you're having a bad time with whatever software comes with the system you're using,
Yeah.
and no matter what operating system you're on, it doesn't matter. You be on your phone, you be on your computer, be wherever you want to, and VLC is there. And it's, the only thing, if there's a small complaint, it is difficult to kind of theme it. I would love to just be able to say, hey, do this in a dark mode. They still have those sort of older style theming constructs where it's like a skin, and it changes the fundamental layout and everything. So I end up just leaving it white. But I mean, that's such a small complaint for all of the benefit I've received from that over the years. Just, I mean, congratulations and kudos to the VLC team. Unbelievable.
Yeah, the UI kind of follows the Audacity school of thinking when it comes to user interface, where they can't see a real big reason to change it, so why put in the effort, But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, because I think most people, the truth is, they don't even bother. They just download it, they install it, and they use it exactly how it is. And it works perfectly fine that way. So, yeah, I agree.
And that's it for the news. Insecurity and privacy. Eric?
All right. We have one story, and it is that federal agency warns critical Linux vulnerability being actively exploited. This is from Ars Technica. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency has added a critical security bug in Linux to its list of vulnerabilities known to be actively exploited in the wild. The vulnerability, tracked as CVE 2024-1086 and carrying a severity rating of 7.8 out of a possible 10, allows people who have already gained a foothold inside of an affected system to escalate their system privileges. It's the result of a use after free error, a class of vulnerability that occurs in software written in the C and C++ languages when a process continues to access a memory location after it has been freed or deallocated. Use after free vulnerabilities can result in remote code or privilege escalation. The vulnerability, which affects Linux kernel versions 5.14 through 6.6, resides in the nf_tables, a kernel component enabling the net filter, which in turn facilitates a variety of network operations, including packet filtering, network address and port translation, or NAPT, packet logging, user space packet queuing, and other packet mangling. Interesting term. It was patched in January, but the CISA advisory indicates some production systems have yet to install it. At the time this Ars post went live, there were no known details about the active exploitation. A deep dive write up of the vulnerability reveals that these exploits provide a very powerful double free primitive when the correct code paths are hit. Double free vulnerabilities are a subclass of the use after free errors that occur when the free function from freeing memory is called more than once for the same location. The write up lists multiple ways to exploit the vulnerability, along with the code for doing so. The double free error is the result of a failure to achieve input sanitation in netfilter verdicts when the NF tables and unprivileged user namespaces are enabled. Some of the most effective exploitation techniques allow for arbitrary code execution in the kernel and can be fashioned to drop a universal root shell. CISA has given federal agencies under its authority until June 20th to issue a patch. The agency is urging all organizations that have yet to apply an update to do so as soon as possible.
Boy, and if you didn't find that interesting.
You know what, though? It just never, and this is such a, sorry to say it, shit kicker way of looking at this. Like, there is just so many ways and so many avenues for people, so many attack vectors. I mean, the idea that anything could ever be truly secure, no matter what you put into it, no matter how many people look at it, it's basically impossible, right? Because there's always someone out there, and it just fascinates me. And I get to this in my wonderings, like, who is out there doing this, right? I mean, I get that someone, obviously there are people, security experts, who can find these things, but obviously on the other side of the fence, there are black hat actors who are out there finding these vulnerabilities and trying to take advantage of them, and it's just fascinating to me. The
I
amount,
think
the
you do
level
have
of detail, like,
this subset of people, and it's their favorite thing to do. It's their hobby or whatever. I mean, leaving aside the people that do it for a living, it's their hobby to try to find. Everybody's looking for a 0 day. Or they're every time something gets updated or whatever, people are out there just looking for vulnerabilities because it gives them a little bit of clout in that community.
well, and above that, though, bug bounties can be very
Yeah,
profitable.
yeah, that too.
I think I saw a story about, like, a kid in high school that had made like $1 million in 1 year off of finding bugs and reporting them and getting the bounties for them.
That's crazy.
Yep,
But
security. A man from security to dream the impossible dream.
you go, Moss.
All
So
right.
yeah,
Well, that's all we have for security, which is why we're messing around right now. Let's move along. Bi-weekly wanderings. Let's start with you, Bill.
All right. Well, I don't have a whole lot, but uh, this week found me on another trip to Houston. I loaded out of New Haven, Indiana, Monday morning and headed to Houston for a Wednesday delivery. Reloaded there and delivered Friday morning in Kenton, Ohio, and that's a roughly 3,000-mile week. This coming week will be similar, as I'm supposed to run up to Detroit and back and then switch trailers for one that will be preloaded for Columbus, Mississippi. And I'm sure everybody found that terribly fascinating. So, yesterday I decided to distro hop this production device. Yeah, cha-ching. Um, the production device that I'm on right now to Ubuntu proper. Last week I switched from Linux Mint 21.3 to Ubuntu Cinnamon 20.04 temporarily so as to get the newer 6.8 kernel. This is because starting with 6.7, support for the Focusrite Scarlett is in kernel, meaning there's nothing to install except for the user space tools, which, yay. The newest kernel currently available on Mint is 6.5. Getting support for that kernel is possible by manually installing the module from GitHub, which you can do, and it works fine. But every time they push a kernel patch, which happens often enough on Mint, you have to go and reinstall that kernel module, which I thought was a pain in the butt, but the more I use Ubuntu, the more I wish I just would have put up with that reinstallation process. This may be one of those things where the solution for the problem creates more problems than existed before. I'm I'm on Ubuntu proper, as I said before, which, as we're all aware, runs on GNOME. While the desktop team have added a lot to improve the overall experience of the desktop, I am finding it a little hard to adapt to and impossible to adopt my workflow to. I was able to adopt some of the things I was doing to the Cinnamon version of Ubuntu, but it started acting kind of weird for me. And so I tried this instead, and yeah, I was probably just as well off on Ubuntu Cinnamon. The only changes I made was to disable that Ubuntu dock that sits on the left side of the screen, which effectively just turns it back into I wrote here a stock GNOME experience, but it's really not the stock GNOME. You still have all of the Ubuntu theming and the session manager and all of the stuff on top with the the app indicators and all the stuff that we wish we had by default. I replaced that dock with the dash to dock extension, which works well for the most part. There's some added weirdness, but it's GNOME. What do you want? I added Flatpak and replaced the Firefox snap with the Mozilla built binary. I get a lot of use out of the Linux Mint web app manager, which is one of the quote X apps that are included with Mint, which is not available in the Debian repos, nor is it a Flatpak. The only way to get it is, as far as I'm concerned, is to download it from GitHub. And they do provide a .deb file, which is nice. I'm glad they've gone through the considerable effort of creating the .deb. It's just unfortunate there's no Flatpak, because that is a very useful tool that I use to make a lot of progressive web apps. So after all that stuff, I get crashes and error reporting prompts left and right. Man, oh man, I can't wait for the Mint 22 betas. And I know Lindener will be on our Discord channel announcing that the minute it happens. So that'll be the first thing I do when I get home that weekend. So the family and I started watching the new Star Wars show, The Acolyte, this weekend. I'm not really put off by the show, but it does seem to be just a teeny tiny bit juvenile. Maybe I'm just an old man now and can't seem to get on with anything, but it was juvenile and almost to the point of being a little campy, in my opinion. And this is going to sound bad, but it kind of feels like what Star Wars would be like if CW was in charge of it. Can you dig it? Anyway, we won't give up on it, and I will report back in the future. Currently, there's 2 episodes available on Disney+, and I didn't write it here in the notes, but as an added note, I got my chair to stop squeaking, and that's about the best thing I've had going for me all day today right here. So, yeah, that you couldn't ruin this day if you tried now.
It's the little things,
It's the little thing. I could not figure out where the squeak, because I sprayed every little place where it moves, and finally I just said to heck with it, and I just sprayed all up underneath. It's like a complicated like plates overlapping each other and all that, and I just sprayed all. It's dripped all over my floor here, but the squeak is gone, and all is well with the universe. So there's that.
The wonderful perfume of WD-40.
Oh God, it's terrible, but it'll last longer than the scentless stuff would. So there you go. That's it for me, though. What about you, Moss?
Okay. I made it back from my trip to Baltimore, and all I've been doing since is sleeping. Old people should not be driving over 1,000 miles in a week. At least I don't have school to teach until August, so I have time to recover. My concert wound up being a full hour on Saturday, so I got to do 11 songs, It was well received, although the turnout was a lot smaller than I was expecting. The convention may have had over 6,000 attendees, but I'm guessing no more than 80 of those were involved in the Filk channel. There were a number of attendees virtual, but one never knew how many. I asked early in my concert and was told there were 6, but I didn't follow up later. I got some very nice feedback on my songs. Everything in Baltimore is expensive. You'd think we were in D.C. The fast food was higher and the restaurants were way higher. We were looking around. There were some restaurants that we were familiar with, and they had 3.1 and 3.2 star ratings. And we found something in the 4.2 area, and it was $100 a plate. We did have a breakfast bar in the hotel, which cost us $70 for the two of us. So I'm very glad to be back home in Tennessee. I had my first official podcast on Hacker Public Radio last week. My host number is 421, and the podcast is HPR 4126, Podcasting for Newbies. Ken thought I was an old-timer HPR type, which is partially true, as our first episode of Distro Hoppers Digest went out as an HPR episode, but we were running on Tony's host ID then. Also, old-timers here know that we were using the HPR Mumble Room back when Joe and I came on the team, so Ken must have gotten used to seeing me around. Also, we keep showing up for the New Year's Eve show at HPR. I did make one mistake on my podcast. I've been working with Full Circle for so long that when I meant to say Ken, I said Ronnie. Ronnie Tucker is not Ken. If any of you want to talk about anything or want to expand your sphere of influence, Ken is always in need of podcasts. All it takes is a computer with a microphone and Audacity. Heck, some of the podcasts I've heard there are recorded on cell phones. Bodhi Linux's lead dev, Robert Wiley, had been operating on a 2009 model Sager, which is made by Clevo, laptop, and it was starting to die. So I decided to ship in my 2014 Lenovo ThinkPad T540p, which also disables me from going back to Distro Hoppers because that was my testing machine. He should have it on the 10th. From our recording date, that's tomorrow. I hope he's happy with it. I got a new Venture USB hub with each pot being switchable on-off. I probably won't be able to get more new stuff for a year or so. I've hardly been using my PineTab 2, so I guess it's not time for new stuff anyhow. It's nice to have on-off switches so I can leave the USB hub on and just turn everything off that's not in use.
That's actually really cool. I don't know that I've ever seen a hub with switches like that.
Well, if you're looking,
are they just little push buttons or
just, yep, right there. If you can see that.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, I got one like that. Yeah.
Huh.
This one only has 4 pots for in and out, and then 2 pots for charging. They do make them with 5 and 7 and 9 and everything else, but I did not need more than 4, so that's what I got.
That's really cool. Yeah, I've never. You're absolutely right. That would be super convenient.
Well, that's it for me, Eric.
All right. Well, I felt like I either experienced things related to or talked a lot about security over the past few weeks. So I thought I would talk about that. I had a family member contact me after being notified by Windows Defender and then Experian that their health provider experienced a data breach. First time ever that's happened. Sarcasm. Apparently their email, name, and possibly date of birth was on the dark web. I love that term. They are reasonably tech savvy, so had already frozen their credit a while ago and changed their password on important sites. They were concerned about an uptick in email spam on their, wait for it, Yahoo accounts. They keep blocking senders, but of course, it's a losing battle. In case you don't know, Yahoo is terrible and couldn't care less about spam. They gave up trying years ago, and I swear it feels like they let spam through on purpose.
Eric?
I have no proof of that.
Yahoo is currently owned by Verizon.
Oh, gee, that explains something then. Yeah. So my suggestion was that they just try something, a third-party email app like Thunderbird or even like the default Windows Mail or a Mac Mail. I'm not sure what kind of computer she uses.
Proton.
Yeah, or well, it's difficult for someone who's had a long-standing email account, and I get that because I'm sure that's exactly what they would say is that, well, I've had this account for 20 years or more. I get that, but I actually still have a Yahoo account because I have a 25-year-old Yahoo email account. But if I use Thunderbird, the spam filtering is much better than what I get if I use the website. So that's why I suggested that they try that. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But anyway, the other part of the message to me was they asked if there was any way to remove their data from the dark web. And I had to inform them that once the data's out there, it's out there for good. Yeah, there's no...
All you can do is change your passwords. So if they have your data, they can't use it.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. Another incident I experienced was a family member being contacted by a scammer pretending to be their bank. This happened while I was at their house. I noticed that they had received a call but didn't know from whom. It was around 7 p.m., so I assumed it was an acquaintance. And after 10 minutes or so of them being gone, I went to check on them and noticed that they were on the computer trying to log into their banking website. My heart jumped as soon as I realized what was happening, that kind of sick feeling you get. And I asked if they had allowed someone to connect to their computer or if they provided any credentials, and they said no. I think the person on the phone heard me because they hung up at that point, and I gently explained what was happening, and they thanked me for intervening. Yikes. So, yeah. The last one is an attempted scam on Facebook Marketplace. I posted an item and within minutes received a notification that someone was interested. I started chatting with them and asked if they were local, and they said yes. Then they asked if they could use Venmo, and I said no, I preferred cash. I asked when they wanted to come pick it up, and they said today. And then they asked if they could call or text me and asked that I please give them my cell phone number. And that set off my spidey senses, and I immediately checked their profile, which I probably should have done to start with, but shoulda, woulda, There was a picture of a couple being wed and a picture of a different woman as the profile picture, and then nothing else. So low effort there. No location, no friends, no posts, nothing. I checked online to see what kind of scams people pull when they can get just your phone number off of Marketplace. And apparently there are things they can do to hijack your number using like Google Voice and different things. So I wrote here, are we having fun yet? I reported the user's profile and blocked them. It just blows my mind that someone responded that quickly to some random for sale post. I mean, it's just a pull toy. It's ridiculous. Like they must have scraping tools that just sit there and notify someone that a new post is up and, hey, ping this seller and try to hack, scam them, I guess. I mean, maybe it was an AI bot that I was chatting with to begin with and not a human being. I really don't know. But I have to wonder how many people they actually get to fall for this because, they almost got me. I almost gave them my number because I would have just thought, oh, it's a local person who just would rather text than use Messenger. And then I thought, nah, that's not right. So, yeah. And then the last thing was I spent more time than I could have possibly wanted to on reviewing Bluefin Linux, which is a derivative of Fedora Silverblue, their atomic, also known as immutable, also known as composable distro. I go into excruciating detail on the upcoming Distro Hoppers Digest episode 53, but here's a much more brief preview. Firstly, I could not get it to install. I tried multiple ISO files and even tried just plain Silverblue, and all of them failed with a nondescript error code 1. And after some extensive searching, I found a bug report from 2018 that has numerous reports of this behavior. There is a workaround. However, this has not been fixed in 6 years. It was very disappointing to spend that much time fighting with Anaconda, one of my least favorite installers, only to discover that it is a long-standing issue. I hate to be ungrateful, but come on. So, once getting past this, I realized that my Wi-Fi adapter wasn't working, a common problem 10 years ago or more, and one that I hadn't seen in probably that long, and certainly not with this system. I was able to fix it eventually, but it took yet more extensive research to figure it out. I couldn't get all the apps to respect the dark theme and eventually just gave up trying. I'm going to stop there because I think you get the point. The irony is that this is positioned as the set it and forget it approach to managing a Linux desktop. And perhaps that might be true eventually, but certainly not for me, at least for now. I actually appreciate what the devs are trying to do, and I understand what it is they're trying to do. It is an idea that shows promise, but I think it will be a little while longer before it is truly a turnkey solution.
And you've heard me on Distro Hoppers talking with wildly effusive words about BlendOS, which is the same type of thing, except it's Arch-based. So you might want to give that a shot. I
believe you had as much luck as I did.
Oh, actually, I had no luck with BlendOS version 1. I had no luck with BlendOS version 2, but version 3 worked beautifully.
Oh, excellent.
And they do not yet have a 4th version, so you can still check out what worked for me.
Good deal.
All right. Well, that about does it for our bi-weekly wanderings. Let's go to Linux innards. I don't see any names on this.
I'm trying to scroll the page and it refuses. Okay. Come on. Come on.
The joys of webcasting.
I can read this because I wrote it, so
I'm happy to read it. I don't.
Okay.
I just got.
Don't fight, boys.
Anyway, in this version of innards, we wanted to talk about Linux pain points, and this is kind of based off of something that the Linux Experiment touched on in a recent video, where he polled his community for what they believed were issues regarding the use of Linux today. And we will outline the questions and give our take. Links to both the video and his YouTube channel are linked in the show notes, as well as the show's description. The first thing he points out is that the number one problem people seem to be having is dealing with the difficulty around integrating devices. So I assume this kind of means the idea of an ecosystem or convergence where sort of everything works together, and maybe something like Apple is putting this expectation in people's minds. Or
as he pointed out in his video, there is KDE Connect, and G Connect is a variant of it, and Zorin Connect is a variant of it. So there are things to do this. My personal thing is I don't want my devices connected. I don't need to have my watch bling every time I get an email or a comment.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, Apple users do have that, but Android users have that expectation too, to some degree, because of the Google tools and stuff like that. But like Apple, if you are bought into the Linux ecosystem all the way, and like I use Nextcloud to back everything, I don't have any Google backup functionality going on my phone whatsoever, and so I'm always connected to the same Nextcloud that we use on the show. Now, I understand and appreciate that is a super nerdy thing right there, and only a very few of us would be willing to go through all that trouble. But it exists.
I'm using Proton Drive, so
and that work. Yeah, if you have an iPhone, and as far as I can tell, that's where you're going to run into the most trouble integrating, because iPhone just does not seem to support, or doesn't support very well, some of the tools or backends that you might be using on a Linux desktop. So that's got to be where a lot of that's coming from. And that was his opinion as well on the video. So
I think that there definitely is a certain amount of that background activity where things are being shuffled or stored in the cloud, so that whenever you just go to a different device, it's just magically there. And I think any amount of effort that requires transferring information, or loading other apps and logging in and doing all sorts of different gyrations to get to the data, I think that's where people maybe have an expectation. And I'm not quite sure I understand why they would think Linux would have that level of interoperability or connectiveness between devices. But again, maybe that's just them coming from using Apple products, or I guess Windows. Windows nags me whenever it loads up. It wants to connect to my phone, but I don't let it. Like Moss said, I'm happy having some amount of siloing of data. Sure, I like that I have the same browser on my phone as my computer so that I can have the same bookmarks and see my history. And so there's some level
and passwords.
Sure, Bitwarden. So, but it's a per application thing. It's not the system level itself. It's Bitwarden, it's Firefox, or Vivaldi in my case. The apps themselves that provide that sort of co-location synchronization type stuff. Joplin Notes, I use that. So those things, but that's sort of that's the level I want it to be at. I really don't need it to be any further. So I guess it's all on what your expectation is. So anyway, so the second thing was some people having trouble with hardware compatibility, and Bill, you can certainly speak to that.
Yeah, well, that's just it. You run into this situation sometimes where for a lot of people, I'm sure if you install your easy to use distro, your Mint, your Zorin, your Bodhi, and you don't get support for your hardware, and then that's just kind of where you might give up. And whereas if people in the know, they might say, well, I guess I'm going to have to run something like Arch for a while until the Linux world gets caught up, because that's where you have the expectation of a newer kernel and access to a lot newer firmware and software to make things work. But I could see how that's a pain point, because that's a series of steps that a lot of people probably just are either unwilling to or perhaps not equipped to take on. So that's completely reasonable, especially when you buy brand new equipment,
Yeah, and that's the part that I still don't quite understand, is that I think I've always seen Linux as being the second operating system on just about everything, where you have used up sort of the life of a device using Windows, where it starts to slow down, starts to have issues. Now, someone like me might just reinstall it and probably get more time out of that device, but ultimately, that's where you're stuck with this device that isn't working as well as you'd like it to, and you say, okay, either I have to replace this device or I need a replacement for the software. And then you say, okay, this is where Linux could be a good fit for that. And because it's older hardware, in most cases, Linux is just going to have the stuff built into the kernel. You don't really have to mess with it. Or there's hardware enablement in something like Ubuntu, and everything that's downstream of Ubuntu. So I guess the idea of getting a brand new piece of hardware that wasn't sent to you with Linux on it, and then putting Linux on it and potentially having an issue with the hardware, that seems like a very small slice of the overall population of Linux users. The ones that probably already know how to deal with those types of things. And so I'm a little surprised. This might just been more of a complaint than a problem,
Well,
where the people.
go and watch the video, folks, because it's the a lot of what we're talking about here. There's a lot more nuance to it, because he actually polled them, and he's got it all broken down into percentages of people here and there, and then he points out that with things like this, the largest number of people that had these problems fell into like a beginner category also.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
going to be true of a lot of the things on here. The beginners.
So maybe someone got a computer and then just thought, well, I'll try Linux. And yeah. Well, I guess the argument I can make is that you are able to run it in a live mode without really changing anything on the system. And
Yeah.
you're able to see pretty definitively, does this stuff work or doesn't it? And the other thing is, I know hardware, especially newer hardware, there are some difficulties. And then also not just newer hardware. Like the one thing I've had consistent issues with are things like fingerprint readers, very sort of specific hardware that has like some weird driver that even, a Windows device, if you were to upgrade to like Windows 11, there might not even be a Windows 11 driver for that, piece of hardware, because that's how specific it was.
And
So
that
I've
is
had
a
issues
thing
like
too.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. My
Yeah.
Dell.
I've had my 2016 T560. The fingerprint reader worked beautifully, but that's because the last update of the fingerprint reader for Linux was in 2016. I can't get it to work on my 2018 model at all.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, outside of stuff like, but I could imagine being pretty frustrated if I was trying to get it working with a newer AMD card and the driver was just in the kernel, but only the newer kernel. And like you're saying, Bill, you're running on an older version of Mint, or you're trying something that isn't using a newer kernel. And yeah, in that case, it might be a challenge.
Yeah, and arguably I'm being kind of picky because I mean these things have been working I've been using these Focusrite devices for a couple of years now, and it works because it's a USB class compliant device. I just don't have. There's a lot of functionality that is kind of hidden on these things, and you don't have the ability to update the firmware until you have the ability for the system to communicate with the device on a hardware level, which now as of the kernel 6.7 that can be done. So yeah, my whole reason for going to Ubuntu in order to get that in tree, I'm really, I have my regrets, but I
Paying
don't
the
know.
price for it, right?
Paying the price, because I mean, you don't get that folks just use Mint. You don't. I mean, seriously, I'm not just saying it because I'm on this show. I mean, Mint does that that extra little bit to put the polish on it to keep it working right.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely true. Now, it could also be that Ubuntu is made to every time there's a problem, because a lot of problems that happen on Linux might be obfuscated from the user and they're not all that important. Well, Ubuntu throws up a dialogue asking if you want to send this off uh, to the
Canonical,
development
yeah.
team, and it makes it feel like, my God, this is going off every time I start the doggone thing.
Well, the biggest part of the problem is, of course, that there are a lot fewer people being paid to work on Linux than there are these other operating systems.
Yeah, and well, there are people being paid to do Ubuntu, which is why
It's true.
you have a little bit higher expect. I'm not going to sit here
and Linux Mint is getting good donations, so they can usually keep their devs happy.
And Linux Mint is, as far as derivative distributions go, they are a well-funded one, no doubt about it. So, I mean, just use that.
Yeah, I'm usually pleasantly surprised because Mint announces what their monthly earnings are in their monthly newsletter, and it's usually pretty healthy.
Bodhi has started doing that, and they've been getting between $25 and $35 a month, and I know 10 of that is me.
Hope they're not spending it all in one place.
Yeah, that's why I had to donate my laptop, because there's no way they could afford to replace his laptop with what they had.
Well, but that's
the next point that Linux Experiment came up with was actually a non-pain point, which is that the vast majority of people are no longer having difficulty installing Linux.
Yeah,
think how far our installers have come in, especially Calamaris, and Ubuntu has a new installer that's easy to use.
That what is it called? Not Ubiquity. Is that the new one? The Flutter-based one?
Well, the old one was Ubiquity, and this one is Ubiquity. It's some derivative of that. I can't think of it right now.
Subiquity or
Subiquity.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
But that's a beautiful installer, and it's so simple and streamlined. I mean, if you're not doing anything weird with your installation, like XFS on root or anything like that, then it's like, I mean, it was easy before. I'm not sure how much they needed to worry about.
Well, so the part that I still think, and I cover this in my reviews on Distro Hoppers Digest, I still contend that partitioning is where people can really get themselves in trouble because they just don't understand disks and systems and stuff like that. And if you don't understand what's on your disk, that I really appreciate in Calamaris the replace option because of the way it shows you a named system, and it'll say Windows or whatever, and you just
in Ubiquity and Subiquity, you have to click Other or do something else.
Yeah, that's true. That I can see how that would be confusing, especially if you've already got Linux on it. You
Yeah.
know, it's
Well, and the idea that you have to resize as well. I mean,
yeah.
Right.
that's still, I still say that, so that they're no longer having difficulty is probably a bit of an overreach. They're probably having much less difficulty, but I have to imagine that people who are trying to dual boot, especially if you're just replacing everything on the disk, then yeah, of course, it's dead easy. You don't even think about it. Just like boom,
Right.
But it's when you're trying to figure out, and what I just went through with Anaconda and Silverblue, and wanting to, like, you can't just have a boot EFI partition. You have to have a boot partition and a separate boot EFI partition, and it's just, they have such a ridiculously difficult way to install and partition. And again, they're supposed to be the easy solution, so I think that's misguided. But anyway, I still think, because there are times where I'm like, am I doing this the right way? Like, wait a minute, let me look at this again before I click OK, because nothing has destroyed more Linux installations and Windows installations than me in a in a partition system. So
I think I'm going to do another tutorial video, because it occurred to me when I did that tutorial with Endeavor OS. Well, this is not this is only going to be useful for people doing Endeavor and stuff like that, because this is not the same installer that Mint uses. So I think I'm going to make another video where I go through how to make all that same stuff happen on there's a lot of similarities. Fundamentally, it's a similar process, but it's a different installer, so it kind of lays it out in a little bit different way. Or I think it's a different installer.
No, I don't disagree.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. Well, the next point surprised both him and me. That 20% of people polled have some trouble installing applications on Linux. What are they doing? Trying to install Adobe?
Well, this surprised me, because apparently there's people having trouble with the concept of the App Store, which in my mind is simpler than going to the internet and searching for applications to use.
But if you've been trained through years of using Windows, like, that's how you get software. You go to the developer's website, you download the XE or the MSI, and you install it like that. And if you follow that same pattern and you download a deb or you download an RPM and you just click the file, some distros handle that gracefully, some don't. So it's a little potentially confusing, and I totally understand how people might have a problem in knowing that, there's this central way to do it.
I thought everyone used Synaptic.
So on Ubuntu you have to install Synaptic and GDebi. But it doesn't stop.
There are a lot of distros. A lot of Debian-based distros you have to install GDebi.
Yeah, well, on this one, see, because remember, they took away the ability for the App Store to install the .debs from your local file system, or at least that's what I thought. But here's the thing. Ubuntu proper comes with both the GNOME software with Snap support built right into it, and when you add Flatpak and FlatHub, you also install FlatHub support to GNOME software. And then there's a second, what they call App Center, which is a more curated version of the software center that's basically showcasing nothing but their snaps. And the binary for that little piece of software is called Snap Store. It's the old Snap Store that you've been hearing about. And you could get rid of that, but that is by default. When you install, you've got both of those big software installing applications, and I can see how that would be confusing for a new user. And of course, I know what I'm doing, so the first thing I do is install Synaptic. That way I can install a bunch of stuff at the same time, but at the same time I can't get my Flatpaks that way, so I use the GNOME software center. And that, you can install the Flatpaks, but then when you hit the run button, to like run it for the first time, which works brilliantly on the Mint software tool, by the way, does not work at all, and it throws an error with some spurious data about some kind of wrong something or other, and just doesn't work. So you got to go into the menu and start the application that way to see if it actually.
Thank you, Clem, for the Mint App Center.
Thank you for everything.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a whole new appreciation I've got for that little
This
bit
is
of polish.
this is really self-serving, I know, for this podcast, but honestly, and this is decades of experience talking, I think if you want to get someone into Linux and have them have a very positive experience, let them use Mint, even
Yeah.
if they're not going to stay there, even if they branch out into something else because they find they have different needs or preferences. That is such a safe and like curated way to start using, because the App Center is so good. The backup is built right in. That everything is just so well thought out, and at this point, it is just like, I mean, the installer, everything works with so few like bugs or instances where you might pick the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. Like, they've just put so much effort into that. So,
And
if
when
you
you
have a new
when you
person,
do your updates, it updates all the flat packs and it removes the unused flat pack files.
You have
yeah,
so much less confusion because you got the one software tool. Here's the other thing too: app images. In order to get app images to work, you have to have a back-end piece of software called libfuse2, because Fuse has moved on, which is the file system user space, blah blah blah. They moved on to version 3. Well, app image has not updated their whatever to Fuse 3, so you have to have a library of Fuse 2 installed in order to work. Mint has that installed by default. Ubuntu does not, and it's not real clear why your app images will not work when you download them and try to install them. Yeah, you can go to the internet and find out why if you want to, but that's just another one of those doggone things that's going to get in the way of new users when you create. And I don't have enough clout to criticize Ubuntu and Canonical too much, but when you create confusion and um, obfuscation at the same time, that's really kind of, you're missing the opportunity to onboard, I think. Which maybe that's not their goal, I suppose, but
yeah, but they have not been like Mint is on a single path. They have a singular vision, and they execute on that vision, and everything is lined up with it. Whereas Ubuntu always seems to have some sort of weird competing, like serving the end user, serving corporations. We've got a Snap store, we've got a App Store, we've got, and there's just this like constant pull between different things, and it's just not cohesive. And
no.
yeah, if you know what you're getting into, it's less of an issue because you understand that. But I think from a fresh perspective, it just seems a little confusing, because why is this here? Why is it like that? So, um, and it's just been that way for such a long. It didn't used to be that way. I mean, Ubuntu
No.
was just smooth. I mean, it was just of singular purpose, and now it just feels like it doesn't know what it wants to do. So, yeah.
Okay, are we ready to move to the next point?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
36% of the people polled had a few hardware problems they couldn't solve, while only 3% reported having hardware problems that actually made using Linux difficult. Not surprisingly, most of the people having problems identify themselves as beginners.
So distros like Ubuntu and Mint too, for that matter, they've got tools for identifying hardware that needs third-party drivers. And I don't know, because I've not ran into a problem where I've needed a third-party driver yet, but I don't know how obvious that is to new people. Um, does that pop up and give you some sort of notification that you got hardware that needs a third party driver? You know, who knows?
Not always. And that's the
No.
other thing about this list that I think is a little challenging is that it really does sort of run the entire spectrum of what Linux, desktop Linux, all the constituents, all the potential. So, I mean, 36% is not a small percentage. So that is actually enough of a sample and a return on that tells you that Linux, and that's probably more of a kernel issue or an underlying system issue than it is a distro tuned issue or a specific type of an issue.
Yeah.
And I think maybe it goes back to the types of things that we were talking about, like a specific piece of hardware, like a fingerprint reader, or like
Right.
certain. Because if 36% of people were having a problem they couldn't solve, yet only 3% had reported having it make a real difference, then I mean that's a huge delta between a reported hardware issue and a serious like blocking issue. That must be non-critical hardware, right? That's my take on it. It means it's something that they can live without and make the choice that, like, okay, this laptop has a fingerprint reader, but I can still just log in,
Right.
which is what I've always done. So
And you've got YubiKey and all that kind of stuff that does work.
Okay,
really well.
everybody run out and buy a T540 or T560 or T460 because that's the last model you can get the fingerprint to work on.
Moss, you're going to drive the prices up, and then you're not going to be able to get one again.
You're going to single-handedly.
I own them all. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's what it is then. Okay.
So from my experience, the two biggest hardware problems have always been NVIDIA and Broadcom. And of course with NVIDIA, if you got an NVIDIA card, for the most part, it'll work
That's
from
the
day
next
one.
point, Bill.
Huh?
That's the next point.
Yeah, well, I'm just rolling into that. The NVIDIA card problem can be solved through the additional drivers tool, and so can the Broadcom thing. Although, when you first install, and even Mint is guilty of this, when you first install it, if you've got a Broadcom Wi-Fi card, you're going to have to run an Ethernet cable to it until it's installed. Then once it's installed, they download all the third-party stuff and it works. But until then, you might have that problem. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, the next point is, not surprisingly, GPU difficulties rank highest in the list of specific hardware issues at 34%, with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth both at 17%. Audio peripherals come in at 15%.
So
None
usually,
of these are surprises.
No.
Yeah.
Usually with NVIDIA, for example, I mean, everything else, I keep saying NVIDIA because everything else, as far as I know, works right out of the box.
As long as you
Right.
have the newest kernel for.
If you got AMD, you're fixed. Everything's in the kernel.
Yeah. Now, if you've got NVIDIA, you'll be able to boot to a desktop. And if all you're going to use that computer for is a little light browsing, paying bills, and shopping online, then I'd say you're probably okay there too. But
Right, Nuvo will work fine for that.
yeah, Nuvo will work, but if you need more than that, then you should still have access to the what they call the binary driver. But the Bluetooth thing, yeah, that's a thing still to this day. Audio peripherals.
Bluetooth stinks on everything.
Yeah, I mean, it never was a good technology.
It's convenient. It
Yeah.
is a trade-off between convenience and quality, and I mean, it's difficult. It's as difficult to use on Windows as it is on Mac, as it is on Linux, as it is on Android, as it is on iOS. It just is what it is, and it varies
it's
by
convenient as long as it works.
Yeah, and it depends on the manufacturer. I have two different sets of earbuds. These work perfectly on everything. I have no problems ever, and these are always a pain in the butt. And it just is what it is. Like, so it depends on the luck of the draw. So to blame Linux for a Bluetooth problem, like, I don't disagree. There are definitely some weird things. GNOME's implementation of Bluetooth and how you have to open the device and toggle a slider to turn it on and off, like, it's just a dumb way to do it. Fortunately, there are some extensions that can get you around that, but of course, you're not going to know that if you're new. And the NVIDIA stuff, I mean, that has come so far. And yes, NVIDIA still is not the best actor, but I mean, they have open sourced some things. Nouveau has gotten substantially better since
Yeah.
NVIDIA started giving out more information. I
Well,
mean, they actually,
the Nouveau manager has actually become an NVIDIA employee and is still working on Nouveau.
right.
So
I
they're
actually heard that
moving
yesterday.
towards that. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's in NVIDIA's best interest to have that blanket support that the card may work better with the binary driver, with the the closed source driver, but it should at least give the basic functionality and some amount of acceleration if it can. And I think that's probably where Nouveau is going to get to. Is it's going to be good enough, like Bill said, to just work for most people.
Yeah.
And audio stuff is always a pain in the butt. Windows, Mac, it doesn't matter. Audio is
That's what I'm
always
dealing with right now.
yeah.
I mean, the
Okay. Go,
I
Bill.
don't recommend the solutions that I've gone through.
What,
for
buying
the-
10 microphones?
because the doggone thing worked perfectly fine. I was just being nitpicky about the firmware, and the
Yeah.
kernel module. It was perfectly
Yeah.
fine on Mint. In fact,
Well, that's
it's not
partly why I
doing-
went back to my Cat Audio mic today, because I just am not comfortable with that Scarlett Solo yet.
And you know what? You sound great. So there you go.
Yeah.
Honestly.
So, I
Okay.
I subscribe to a podcast, and
Yeah.
they say the absolute most you have to spend on a microphone is just for one of those Q2Us, there's an Audio Technica out there, and I'm sure that's what I've got. I've got a few of them. Moss has one, and that's what Eric is talking on right now. And just a USB cable straight to your machine is more than adequate to get by with, but I have to be a nerd, so I've got all this other stuff.
Well, I need the Scarlett Solo if I ever get serious about my recording. So,
Right.
Yeah.
but without for podcasts, I don't need it.
You
Yeah.
don't. You really don't. But once you do have the real software for it, you'll be able to update the firmware and all that.
I look forward to that. I have
Yeah.
never yet, to date, had anything that a newer kernel would fix. Everything I've got now, except for the Scarlett Solo, I could be running kernel 4.19 and I'd be happy.
That's a good point, Moss. In reality, how many times has a new kernel actually fixed a problem that we had going on? I don't know.
Nah.
I'm not sure if that's been much of a reality. I can't think of a point in time where that was a thing.
Okay, next point. Software problems still seem to be a pain point with using Linux. Availability and installation seem to be at the heart of this problem.
Yeah, and by availability, I'm sure it's like your Adobe and your
Microsoft Office, yeah.
that kind of stuff. And sorry, that's
I still contend, though, I mean, you can do Office in the browser, and for the vast majority of people, it has everything you could ever possibly want. Yes, if you're a Excel power user, maybe you're not doing scripting and stuff like that. But again, I don't think that's who this group is that's having these problems. So,
and I don't think they found OpenOffice, because apparently they even match Microsoft scripting. I don't use OpenOffice myself, so I don't know that. I'm using what was formerly the best match for Microsoft Office, which is SoftMaker Office. And a lot of people hate that because you have to pay for it.
OnlyOffice also boasts the closest compatibility with MS Office that you can get in open source. One of these
it's
days
like we talked
might
about
find out.
earlier, though.
Yeah.
It really comes down to what you need, and I'd still contend that almost no one needs the full Microsoft Office suite. Yes, they may like it or have some sense of attachment to being able to say they have Office, or maybe there's a professional requirement where they're trying to get a job and the company says, well, do you have Microsoft Office? But usually they'll supply it to you. I don't know. I find this one to be a little strange, other than Adobe, which is the stalwart holdout. Like that is always the one that everyone's like, well, I can't use Adobe products. And it's like, okay, well, you're absolutely right. You can't. So I hate to be dismissive about it, but this one just seems a little, and even he was, I remember as I was watching the video, he's just kind of like, this is still like, everybody knows this. And I don't know why this is still such a mystery to people. You know, it kind of is what it is. And you either can accept it and live without it, or like, as if we've talked about, I mean, on Linux Saloon last night, we were talking about this exact thing where it's like, you know, you have a virtual machine of Windows that you fire up in order to do that one thing. There's a CAD software. I think that's another big one, is like whatever CAD that everyone uses doesn't run. And so,
AutoCAD.
you know, AutoCAD. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're right. And so have a virtual machine of Windows and fire that up and you do that thing. And so, I mean, there are ways around it, and I get that those are a little more advanced and maybe more trouble than people want to deal with. But I just feel like this one's sort of an old, you know, I don't know. That was a pain point 15 years ago. It was hard
in that case, let's move to the next point. People still seem to be having wake, sleep, suspend issues.
Now, this is a thing.
Me too.
This is a thing.
Yeah, this is a thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have this problem on my laptop running Arch. You didn't think we were going to get through an episode, did you?
Wait a minute. You run Arch?
I do.
Sorry, I had to.
I run Bodhi. Nobody knows that.
Yeah, everybody knows that, Moss. No, mine'll, you know, go to sleep and then wake up and then you got no Wi-Fi, and that was, I guess, somebody out there. I heard somebody on another show I was listening to. I think it was Linux After Dark. One of those guys was saying that he wrote a System D unit to restart the daemon every time it wakes up, and, you know, to get Wi-Fi working, which, well, that's been a thing for a long time. So
on my T580, I don't have that problem in either Mint or Bodhi. I haven't tried it on anything else because that's all I keep on that laptop. It sometimes takes a minute or so for the Wi-Fi to wake up, but it does wake up.
And honestly, I haven't tried that on this machine. I'm afraid to do that with Ubuntu. I'm afraid it'll kick me out of my own house or something.
Lock the door, yeah.
Something that's been a consistent issue. I've had 5 Dell laptops over the last 12 years, 15 years, and all of them have had the same SD idle versus deep sleep type. And the default is usually SD idle, and Dell does not use that for whatever reason. And your laptop will just, if you forget to change the type and you close the lid and throw it in your bag, well, there it is, like suffocating because it's not going to sleep and it's just going to be, you know, closed off in a bag. So, yeah. And it's just something that I've just come to know that I need to do. And it's a very simple update to Grub, and you throw it in the boot parameters and get on with your life. But yeah, that is definitely something. I'm a little surprised that they don't talk more about battery issues, which maybe they did and I missed it. But
right,
that's one of my complaints is, and I think this kind of goes along with that same thing of wake, sleep, suspend. How do you deal with CPU cycles and P states and like all this kind of like memory optimization and sort of BIOS level stuff? And I think there have been some credible points made about hardware vendors building for Windows, building for Mac, you know, building for these vendors that know what's expected and how it all fits together. So I don't discredit that, but at the same time, it doesn't make it any less frustrating when these things don't work right.
Interestingly, I've heard, now this is completely anecdotal, but I've heard that those who are using the Asahi on the Mac M1s are enjoying the same, relatively the same battery life as they would with Mac OS, which is interesting. That shows me it can be done.
It makes me wonder if, because ARM does different cores, where some cores are low power cores and some cores are performance cores, and like maybe that's just inherent to the design that it just runs better versus, Intel and AMD CPUs that use that x86 architecture that, all the cores are the same, and it's really more about throttling and the speed than it is in switching between active cores. So
Well,
anyway, yeah.
I hate to brag, but you've heard this before. Maybe the people listening to us haven't. My T580 has two batteries, an internal and external. The external is a Model 61, and you can also get a 61 Plus and a 61 Plus Plus that gives you a bigger battery. And I got a brand new 61 Plus, and I'm only charging that thing once a week, and it doesn't need it then.
Hmm.
We're using it. We took it to Baltimore, and both of us were using it the whole week, and did not need to charge it. I took the charger with me, but I didn't even break it out.
That's nice. Yeah.
I just replaced it.
The 570, 580, and 590 models, I do not know about later models. I know the 560 did not have an internal battery. But the 570, 580, and 590, and presumably the 400 models that are corresponding to that, have a dual battery system. And if you get a new and beefed up external battery, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, I could have done better. I could have got a 61 Plus Plus, and then I wouldn't be charging it once a month.
But isn't that thing like a honking, like gigantic battery? Like,
Not really.
Doesn't the brown part just get bigger in the back?
The 61 is flat to the back of the computer, is true. But the 61 Plus just gives you a little more solid standing back.
That's a
I
very
think
nice
the
I got a
61
Dell like
Plus
that.
Plus would be too much for me, but yeah.
Yeah.
I got a
Too
Dell
much
like
junk in
that.
the
You get the
trunk on
bigger
that.
battery, and it gives you a little bit of lift in the back, and it provides better circulation of the air.
Air
actually,
circulation.
because,
Yeah.
which I use the little fan platforms anyway. But yeah, I mean, it's if you wanna look at
Okay,
the bright
bragging
side.
aside, the next
Bragging
point
aside.
is something that I don't know anything about. Gaming outside of Steam is still an issue.
Yeah, we were.
You know, I just tell people, if you're going to use Steam, it's pretty good. It's not perfect. It's pretty good. But if you're going to, well, I will say that cloud gaming, if you want to use like Xbox cloud gaming, that works pretty good on the Edge browser. And well, it works on Firefox too. The problem I ran into is with one problem you're going to have with containerized browsers is being able to connect to a game controller, which incidentally, game controllers was another thing. I didn't put it in the notes, but it was another thing people were having a little bit of problem with, was getting connectivity. And I wonder if a lot of it is to do with, like, you get the snap of Firefox and you try to play games and it won't correctly connect to a game controller, and
Right.
so if you're gonna want to make sure for cloud gaming that you've got a natively installed browser for that. In my opinion, that's just my experience. Now, there might be ways around it, but if there are hoops that you have to jump through, and that's never going to be a sustainable solution to anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, gaming,
And all of that all these issues still stem from game developers still building, especially on a PC basis, they're building for Windows because that's just the best platform for it. It's the supported platform. It's who the hardware vendors support. That's the ecosystem. And, when you're competitive gaming, no one's competitive gaming on Linux. Like, you're in Windows, those Twitch gamer shooters and stuff. Like, it is what it is, right? I mean, if you are that hardcore into games, it's like if I wanted to be a race car driver and or have track days with my car, and I'm just driving the wrong type of car, and then complain that the car is no good at the track. It's like, well, yeah, because it's not built for that. That's not what it does. I mean, yes, you can.
Yeah, you don't race a Chevy Cobalt. It's that simple.
Right. I mean, you can do it, but it's not going to be as
Don't
much
buy
fun
one
as
either.
racing. Yeah. So, I mean, if you are setting out to have the best possible gaming experience, then you should just know that that's going to be Windows.
Yeah.
For now,
And
at
if
least.
you're going to
Maybe
have the
forever.
best possible gaming experience, there are lots of gaming podcasts you can listen to, and we are not one of those.
This is true. This is
So
true.
the next point is only 26% of the people polled said they could do everything they wanted with regard to productivity, while only 1% said they simply weren't able to get things done with Linux. Again, beginners seem to have the most problems.
Now I
I
really
don't have a problem with
simplified.
that. Yeah.
This is a gross oversimplification of a breakdown that he provides in the video, where one of the entries was a 20% reading of people that seem to indicate that this is the number of people that are able to do everything they want. And then at the other end of that spectrum is the 1% that just can't get anything done. And it's, important to note that everything we said prior kind of plays into this with the software availability and the ability to onboard. You're always going to do better when you've got that friend that's been using Linux for years that can, when you have these individual problems, you can talk to them. And Linux has been and always will be and always should be a community effort, not just in the creation of it, but also in the using of it as well, because the reality is more people do get paid to make Windows and stuff like that. Productivity is, yeah, like we said before, you're going to have to get used to either doing work in the browser or using software that's might be a little different from what you're used to. But I don't know. Can we do a better job of onboarding people in terms of productivity, or is there an unrealistic expectation?
This is so totally subjective, where defining productivity is first of all difficult, because what does that even mean in terms of, are you not able to just use the windowing system because it's difficult for you to know how to get around and do things in the system itself because it's different from Windows, and so that is a roadblock to you being productive? Or is it that the software you're intending to use doesn't work on Linux, which seems to be fewer and fewer cases anymore? The number 26%, that's really low for saying that. I am at 99.999% able to do anything and everything I want to do. And I do all sorts of technical things and productive things and video and audio. And I can't think of any situations where 74% of people would
Well,
be
like I said,
impeded.
it's broken down into far more nuanced categories on the video. So
I see that. It's down
And
below.
our next point does that
Yeah.
breakdown. So, Eric, do you want to do that?
Yeah, and I'm looking at it, and it's this list is 36% gaming, which, again, I get that gaming is a huge catalyst, a huge driver for selling machines, for keeping desktops alive, for keeping computing going, but that's not productivity. I don't care what anyone says. Gaming is not productivity. It's the opposite of productivity.
Exactly.
So then if you discount 30%, 36%, so 20% is Office Suites, which, hey, if you have to use the full fat version of Microsoft Office, your choices are use a virtual machine and then just full screen it and it'll work perfectly. You probably won't even know that you're not using a real computer. Or use Windows. It's as simple as that. And the one on Mac isn't even as good as the one on Windows. So you're probably already using Windows anyway. And if your intent is, well, then you're just going to switch to Linux and, oh, well, I can't have Office. Well, then, yeah, then that is an absolute line in the sand. So when you say Office
I will say that back in 2010, I was using OpenOffice. LibreOffice had not been forked yet. And I found and reported 3 critical bugs to my workflow as a editor of, actually senior editor of a publishing company. And they looked at it and said, oh, we're aware of all those, but we're not interested in fixing them. And to this date, they are not fixed. So that's why I use SoftMaker instead of LibreOffice.
Yeah, gotcha. So 18% nothing. So those are the people that don't have any issues. Graphic design, sure, that's Adobe. So again, Microsoft Office, Adobe. Video production, I guess if you're using Adobe again, After Effects or whatever, uh, absolutely all the video editors except for DaVinci Resolve do not run on Linux natively. Uh, CAD, we already mentioned AutoCAD. So look at this. We're such a small percentage. This is not everybody needs CAD. Not everybody's using the full Office suite. Not everybody is a graphic designer. So this seems to be a very small section. And I mean, granted, he does have a fairly substantial reach in terms of like Linux content producers, but I have to believe that if this was a more generalized, sort of homogenized survey of just people and not somebody who's watching his content specifically, that there would be a different sort of
And he did
response to this
caveat
kind of
that at the
stuff.
beginning of the video that keep
Okay.
in mind this is, I put this out on my channel, and God knows the kind of people that are going to subscribe to and watch videos about Linux are
Right.
that very thing right there is going to skew
Yeah.
the results.
Yep.
But
And I don't want to make it sound like I'm being dismissive or upset about any of this, but I mean, the reason I'm being a little sort of tongue in cheek about this is that we've spent the whole time here talking about literally 5 different things: Microsoft Office, Adobe everything, no matter what it is, AutoCAD, and then some of the audio production tools if you're a professional, that needs that type of stuff. And video conferencing, almost everything that I'm aware of works on Linux or in a browser. And the Chrome browser on Linux is the Chrome browser, with almost no caveats. So again, this is such a small subsection of all of the possible
Mhm.
software, of all the possible productivity stuff. So, and again, as we just mentioned, it's a very specific audience. So it is what it is. And I think that we could probably have had the same discussion 10 years ago, and we may still have the same discussion 10 years from now, because I don't think Microsoft is ever going to build a Linux version of Office. Neither is Adobe, neither is AutoCAD. It just is what it is. So, I think that if people are interested in, I mean, the ideal setup for me, if I was in this situation, would be to have a machine that was powerful enough to run a very decent virtual machine experience, have whatever, Windows version I'd need, with enough access to my hardware that it's optimized and can run very well, and then have the thing that I need to do in there. And I used to do this years ago for my job. I mean, I didn't have a choice. There were some things that were just Windows
Okay.
only, and that's what I did. And
All
then,
right.
so anyway, I'm
Well,
just saying, like, it just seems like we're churning the same,
yeah, but
the
I,
same
well,
thing.
this
let
is
me
all
roll. Let me roll the next 3 of these together.
okay.
Overall, most people find Linux stable, though they acknowledge some issues here and there. Most people find Linux an enjoyable experience. Interestingly, 50% of the people polled said they had to use the terminal to effectively administer Linux, while 23% reported they didn't have to use the terminal at all. And 61% of those polled said they had to look up solutions to problems online and were successful in fixing said problems, while 7% said they looked online but weren't able to find solutions. And we'll have
No,
one
hold
more
on a
point.
minute. I wanna, you're getting ahead. That whole thing with 50% of the people saying they had to use the terminal, I found interesting because most modern distributions for regular users,
Mm-hmm.
they seem to want you to believe, and I'm not arguing against it, but they seem to want you to believe that the whole system is administrable without the terminal. In fact, I've even heard Danielle Foray. She was asked directly at one point, "Do you need to use the terminal at all in elementary OS, or can you get by without it?" And she replied, "Well, no. Unless you're doing something, advanced level, you can get by without the terminal."
Yeah,
just
I
fine.
can use Mint or Bodhi without touching my terminal. Although there are some things that are quicker or better to do in the terminal.
And that's
It's
the whole
not that you
reason you
have to
use it.
do it.
The tools in the terminal tend to be more powerful. They tend to be more. Uh, they tend to be faster. And if you've got something that you need to administer that it's not something you're going to spend a lot of time administering, it's better to just run a command in the terminal, fix the thing that needs fixed, and then move on. Whereas a piece of software with a GUI, that's you got to install that and then use it. I don't know, but that was interesting that 50% because that's
Yeah, that
compared to a
seems
lot of
really
these
high.
other numbers, that's a relatively high number.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I wonder again what constitutes effectively administering, because honestly, like I have a problem that some of the things that are in tweaks for GNOME, like the fonts and things, and the theming and stuff like that, that should be first class. That should just be part of settings. But that aside, everything I need is pretty much in settings. If you go to Plasma, everything's in settings pretty much. I mean, you don't really need to control much of anything in the terminal. So whenever I hear effectively administer, I wonder what types of things they're
those
trying
are
to do,
my
because
words, by the way.
it tells me, yeah, it tells me like they're doing something that goes beyond just configuring their desktop like they would in Windows, like they would in Mac. So
Okay, what about looking up solutions?
Okay, so the problem with that is always I don't know how to fix it, but the problem with that is knowing how we name these things and how
Right.
the words we use to
And it's the
describe.
same
yep,
problem if you're
Yeah,
a new Windows user trying to find out what the heck word they use to describe
yeah.
something.
And
and
when you
listen,
say it wrong, you get criticized for that in some communities. Looking
Yeah.
at you, Arch.
Well, community is the next point, so let's stay off community for now. Just looking up
yeah,
solutions online,
I think
and
nomenclature is a
7%
big
that they
one.
couldn't find it.
I think the difficulty, just as Bill mentioned, is really understanding how to describe the issue, because the indexing of the user groups and the data, the discussion forums and all that stuff is out there in the search in the browsers. It's, you just have to know how to ask the question. And like my experience of dealing with Bluefin and Silverblue was that I had a hard time really understanding exactly what to say to find it. I went to GitHub pages, I went to forums, I went all these different places being very specific about searching, and it took long enough for me to just the persevere to find the thing. The thing was there. It just took me a long time to find it because it was hard for me to really get there. And this is, this I've been doing this for a long time, not only in Linux but also as a profession in IT. So like it's a skill I already have, but it's sometimes can be very challenging, especially if it's not something that a lot of people experience. If it's a
Right.
very common issue, you're going to find an answer right away, especially if you're on Ubuntu or Mint or something like that. But if you're on, some, offshoot, good luck, because unless someone has run into it in their community and it's been indexed properly and you're asking it right. So, yeah.
Eric's got the blues,
Oh
the
no.
silver blues and the blue fins. He's got the blues.
Yeah. Well, then, yeah, you're right.
All right. Of the people who reported interacting with the Linux community regarding problems, 29% said their interactions were friendly and useful, while 1% reported a negative experience and were ultimately unable to fix the problem.
And again, that's grossly oversimplified because there was about 9 or 10 other categories that people fit into. These
It
are the
also
two.
depends on what community you're talking to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, you run into these personality nuances when you're interacting with community. Um, some people are not very well articulate. Then you have a language barrier sometimes where people are trying to explain what they want, but they don't know the right words. And then somebody else might not deal with that very well. Um, Human beings, and it's you're gonna run into a lot of the same problems in a support forum that you run into in social media where people have just gotten far too used to saying whatever they want without getting hit in the mouth, and I've seen that. But on the other hand, I want to say that by and large, the Linux community, with a few exceptions, are helpful. Um, as long as you can, as long as you can understand each other, you can come to a way to fix a problem. Um, I've had good experiences with community. I've had bad experiences. I've had experiences where people misunderstood because of the way that I worded something. They interpreted it as criticism or um, just a negative attitude, and so they've responded the same way, you know. And I would say anybody, if you're going to decide to um, participate in a support forum or any kind of user forum, you need to try to cultivate a positive state of mind, I think, because you are going to run into people who are frustrated and panicking, and they might behave as such, and you have to learn how to let some of that roll off of you. Because I mean, it's still to this day, the forums are probably the most effective way to come to some sort of solution for these problems. I don't know that that's ever going to go away. Um, the the chat platforms used to be an option. I'm not sure if that's so much of a thing anymore. Some
I,
distributions
th-
still come with it.
I honestly think if you have a friend, a relative, somebody who has a bit of a technology bend to them, that just, even if they are not like a technology professional, or they're at least savvy enough to be able to find answers and things like that, someone who's already a friendly person to you, like that's probably the best possible solution or situation. Secondary to that, I mean, I think you have to find either a Linux group, user group, or a forum or something maybe related to the specific, distribution you're using. That's usually the easiest thing to do. And again, to be shameless about it, I think the Mint forums do an excellent job. I have rarely seen people be rude or just
Yeah,
outright condescending there. Uh, Most people will bend over backwards to help new people. Um, and so, like, that's makes sense to me. And it can be difficult because, especially something like Ubuntu, there are so many resources, and even their own resources. They have an old forum, they have a new forum, they have IRC, they have different chats on different services, and it's a little sort of disparate and disconnected. And some of it is developer focused, and some of it is end user focused. And depending on where you land, you might not have a great experience. I'm shocked that there was only 1% that reported a negative experience. I mean, I have negative experiences all the
Really?
time.
Well, I will also, just because I have to say this, say that I have found the Bodhi community to be incredibly helpful,
Bodhi's
and we're
great.
we're
Yeah,
doing we're doing tech support for beginners 24/7. Uh,
I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you. Yeah, the Bodhi forum is good. The Linux Mint, like Eric said, fantastic people. I
well,
saw.
would Bodhi get on the Discord, because everyone is there. Everyone on the team is on the Discord.
Oh well, there you go. That's even, you would get even faster results. But I,
Yeah.
about 10 years ago, when I was using Mint, uh, I saw a conversation. So I don't, and I wish I could remember what the question was, but this back and forth went all night long about, with this guy trying to help this other person fix a problem, because I watched it for a while, then I went to bed, and I got back up, and I used to leave machines run in those days, and it was still on that page, and by that time the thing had grown to like 7 pages long, and however. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy stayed up all night trying to help this guy, not knowing him from Adam. Now that's something
Hmm.
right there, I think. you
Yeah.
know but on the other hand, you do have, I don't want to name, well, sure I do, Reddit. Some Reddit communities you can
Hmm.
you know
Yeah.
um the Arch Linux, the Arch forums, you're going to have
Oh, yeah.
mixed, you're gonna have mixed results in that. Some of the positive ones, linuxquestions.org.
Oh yeah, love Linux
That's
questions.
that's a good one.
It seems to be aging out though.
I
It's
think there's a couple things that tend to annoy everybody. That's whether you're technical, non-technical, whether you're part of a community or whether you're just a user. Like, one is, did you at least try to do a little bit of effort to fix it yourself? Because if all you're doing is coming and you have this sense of entitlement where fix it for me, like that's a hard thing for people to swallow. Even really friendly, like well-meaning people, uh, I have some expectation that you've at least tried to search for it. Like, that's as simple as that. Like, if you got a message, search for it. That probably led you in some direction. I get that there are plenty of times where it doesn't. Fine. Then you at least did that amount of effort. Secondarily, yeah, don't have that sense of entitlement. I've had so many people, like when I've started to try to help them, just have this, well, fix it, fix it, fix it thing. And I just don't respond well to that. I mean, I really don't. So I'm not mean or I'm not rude. I'll just stop helping you. And if you consider that a negative interaction, then I'm sorry, because I'm not going to fix it for you, because my expectation is you're using Linux because, first of all, you're in control of your own experience with your computing. That's a good thing. Secondarily, you should have some command of your own systems to understand what's happening and why it's happening and how to deal with it. And three, if you have no interest in doing either of those things, I probably can't really help you anyway. So, that's
Okay.
kind of my take on it.
Well, I think we can pretty much wrap this thing up. Bill, could you make sure that the link to the video we're talking about is in the show notes?
it's
I
in the
didn't
show
see it.
notes up where it starts where it says Linux pain points. The links there
All
where it
right.
says the Linux experiment and then the recent video. It's there, but the links are
Right.
also in the YouTube show description.
Right.
And I will make sure that they are in the description on the audio only version of the show wherever you get your podcasts.
Any final thoughts on this, guys?
I suppose, I mean, we could talk about this, we could revisit this subject, and in 5 years I doubt that we will have much of anything new to say. Just because so I've got a lot of people that use Linux that are not necessarily tech savvy, and they get on just fine with it. And that's because I took the time before putting Linux on a machine for them to try to understand what their use case was. Are you just going to use a browser? In most cases, normal people, that's all it really is. They're going to use a browser to pay bills, shop online, watch videos, whatever. If they need to write a letter or something, make a little spreadsheet, then LibreOffice works just fine for that. And beyond that, I try to understand, did you get on good with Windows XP? If that's the case, and you didn't get on well with a newer version of Windows, then maybe something with XFCE or Mate would be the best bet for you. And surprisingly, if all you've ever known is the interface on a smartphone, then GNOME might be a good option for you. So it's understanding, it's having a little bit of understanding going into using Linux, what you can expect and what you can't expect. That's why it's good to have somebody that knows this stuff that you can talk to in real time, in real life, before you.
And we will be listing Bill's phone number later in the podcast.
Yeah. Yep, there you go. 1-800-658-5. Yeah. How's this?
555-1212.
There you go. So.
Okay. Well, that pretty much wraps us up, doesn't it? All right. So. Then that's it for innards. We don't have any emails. What's the matter with you people? So no vibrations from the ether. We don't have anything in check this out.
That might all be because Joe's not here for the emails and Majid's not here for the check this out. So
that could be true. We will welcome them back next episode.
Oh, we sure will.
Okay. Housekeeping and announcements. Thank you for listening to this episode of mintCast. If you see something that you'd like to hear about, tell us. Send us email at mintcast@mintcast.org. Join us live on YouTube. Post at the mintcast subreddit. Chat with us on Telegram and Discord, or post things directly at https://mintcast.org. Our next episode will be 2 p.m. U.S. Central Time on Sunday, June 23rd, 2024. We have a link in the show notes to get that converted to your time zone. Our next roundtable live stream is at 2 p.m. U.S. Central Time, Saturday, June 15th, 2024. And we have a link in the show notes to get that converted to your time zone. Our next roundtable live stream will be 2 p.m. U.S. Central Time on Saturday, June 29th, 2024. And there's a link in the show notes to get that converted to your time zone. Live stream information is at mintcast.org/livestream. Wrapping it up. Joe's not with us, but you can find him at tllts.org, linuxlugcast.com. Write him at jb@mintcast.org, or there's a link to buy Joe a coffee if you really like the stuff he does, and we all do. I do Full Circle Weekly News. I have retired from Distro Hoppers Digest. We got to get that out of the show notes. You can email me at bardmoss@pm.me, and my Mastodon is at zyvola@hosttux.social. Bill?
Well, you can email me. I'm Bill at mintcast.org. I'm Bill_H on Discord. At WCHauser3 at fostodon.org on Mastodon. Also, check out my other two podcasts, Linux OTC and 3 Fat Truckers. Links to both of those in the show notes.
Majid will be back next time. He's feeling under the weather today. You can reach him at Dr. Majid at DRMAJID at mintcast.org. He has all of his social stuff at atypical_doctor at mastodon.social, atypical doctor on Instagram and Threads, and has the Atypical Doctor podcast on Spotify, and he also shows up on Linux OTC. Eric?
Don't bother. No, I'm just kidding. You can hear and see me on this and the Distro Hoppers Digest and Linux OTC podcasts, as well as the Linux Saloon stream. If you'd like to get in touch with me, I can be reached by email at eric@mintcast.org, or on most social media sites as my full name, Eric Adams, just not the mayor of New York City.
Before we leave, we want to make sure to acknowledge some of the people who make mintCast possible. Bill, probably for our audio editing, archive.org for hosting our audio files, Hobstar for our logo, innards for the animated Discord logo, Londoner for our time syncs and various other contributions. He just fixed my spreadsheet for me on who's hosting when. Bill for hosting the server which runs our website maintenance, and the Nextcloud server on which we host our show notes and raw audio. And the Linux Mint development team for the fine distro we love to talk about. Thanks, Clem.
Thanks, Clem.
And Co.
And Co.
And
Woohoo!
Yay.
Not bad. 211.
Yeah, pretty good.
I notice that the shows I host tend to be faster because I keep trying to move things along.
In other words, you rush.
Oh, yeah,
So
sure.
We
didn't.
Yeah,
17 minutes.
We didn't say anything we didn't want to say. We didn't not say anything we did want to say. It's not rushing. It's getting it done.
He's Russian.
Okay, need to export this thing. And I have to not put it in the Full Circle Weekly News folder.
Oh, my gosh.
Do we have a folder, Bill?
Yes.
All right, I will go to the folder. Since by the time I get the folder open, I'll have it done. mintCast, new folder. Show audio. Episode 439. No files in here. Oh, I'm still working on mine. 30, 39, 40, 41, 42. It's done.
4:30.
And I don't think I'm going to touch another immutable system for like at least a year.
You really ought to look at Blend. It's so beautiful.
I mean, the tools are very interesting. There are some compelling solutions, but I mean, just the sheer number of rough edges, it's just incredible how difficult. Everything I've tried to do has just been an uphill battle. So
another similar one I've been looking at is Big Linux, but some versions work really beautifully and others don't, and it seems like they keep dropping the features that I love so much.
Well,
but they're out of Brazil, so they're looking at a different audience than we are.
Yeah, that's true. They certainly have enough people in country to find their audience.